this is a PowerPoint on the best decks in Hearthstone's history. Starting with Death Knight, and we have triple Blood Death Knight from Festival of Legends. This deck was arguably one of the best control decks ever, just ever. In Standard especially, it was so strong that it was meta in Wild for a little bit. It wasn't anything crazy, but you could play it. It was definitely worth playing, which that alone should tell you how strong this deck was, that a 2-set Death Knight was playable in Wild. That's how powerful this deck was. It was so strong, in fact, that it got the entire rune mechanic of Death Knight nerfed. You used to be able to discover triple rune cards, but because of this deck, they nerfed it into the ground, and you can't discover triple rune cards anymore, killing a lot of cards and their viability, but it's been unreal what Death Knight has had to suffer because of this nerf. It's kind of just crazy that one single nerf has killed Death Knight in Wild to the point that, like, you just can't play it. You can't play Death Knight in Wild. Discovering triple rune cards was so powerful that it made it possible to play this class. I just can't, like, you have to understand that for a deck that only has standard cards in it, maybe a few wild cards at most, to be viable in Wild like this deck was, that's unreal. No other Wild deck has ever been able to accomplish this, and it's just insane. Then, for Demon Hunter, of course we have Day 1 Demon Hunter. It's pretty similar to the fact that it was like that for Death Knight, but Demon Hunter made more use of Odd for its Day 1 cards than it did for the regular deck, so I don't consider it the same way. And then a lot of the cards were nerfed to the point that Odd Hunter or Demon Hunter couldn't be played, so I don't consider it the same way as Death Knight, but it's still unreal how powerful this deck was. You had to be there, dude. Like, no other card has had, no other deck, cards, anything have had hotfix Day 1 nerfs ever. The fastest we've had is like Day 3 with your Azurite Snake and Warlock. That was a Day 3 nerf, right? So this just alone should tell you how broken this deck was. It was absolutely unfucking real. Like, genuinely so broken. Like, and it's crazy because you have these cards actually back in the game from CCG, and CCG is terrible. If these cards were all just reverted, I don't even think most of them would be overpowered. I don't think Battle Fiend would be better. I don't think Skull of Gul'dan would be broken. I don't think Twin Slice would be broken. I don't think Altruist the Outcast would be broken. Anything like that. So that's crazy, right? To think that the best standard deck ever, this is probably the best standard deck ever, is so weak nowadays that half of these cards could be reverted and it wouldn't matter. Like, it's just unreal. Absolutely unreal that these cards are just that broken, but today they won't even see any play. It's just crazy. Then for Druid, this one I actually thought was a toss-up, because yes, Twig Druid was absurdly broken. Twig Druid completely warped Wild around it, and there's just basically not much, if anything at all, that could beat it. But I still want to make an honorable mention for Yogg-Saron in Questline Druid or Yogg-Saron Unleashed during the Titans mini set, because that deck also completely warped Wild to the point that only 2 decks in the entire format were playable. That's how broken Questline Druid during Titans was. But I'm still going to go with Twig Druid because only 1 deck in the entire game was playable, and it was Twig Druid. Fucking-surd card. We already knew that Twig of the World Tree and Sphere of Sapience was incredibly overpowered. We knew that already, right? But the issue was you couldn't really consistently get it before, like, turns 8, 9, anything like that to just ramp your guff. So it wasn't really that crazy. Yes, if you got the high roll of getting it on, like, turn 5, it was very good, but it wasn't that consistent. Then they released Instrument Tech. And Instrument Tech is arguably, just because of this combo, one of the best cards ever released. Just because of Twig of the World Tree plus Sphere of Sapience combo makes Instrument Tech one of the best cards ever. That's insane. That is insane that a pretty okay card that sees some use just became one of the best cards ever simply because of one interaction. This deck was just disgusting. You had no counterplay because Druid would instantly have their 10 mana crystals on turns 4, 5, 6, and you would just OTK your opponent through your now nerfed, a Nubricon Alex combo. It was unreal. You would just play a Nubricon, Bran, Alex. You bounce the Alex. You play it again. It was just so disgusting. Of course, Nubricon's been nerfed as well, same as Twig, but it was just disgusting. You could also play it in a questline Druid where you were playing a little slower. You played a lot more value, a lot of big minions, but that deck was fine. It was good. Don't get me wrong, but the Nubricon version where you just OTK your opponent through the Alex Straza Lifebinders was so truly disgusting. I'm sorry. I don't understand how nothing was preemptively nerfed because people knew this was coming. We knew this was going to be broken, and guess what? It was. Then for Hunter, I chose Questline Hunter. This is easily the best Hunter deck of all time. Odd Questline Hunter. It's the only S-tier Hunter deck. It's great. You had infinite damage, infinite removal. Basically the only thing holding this deck back was Hunter card draw, which everyone knows is terrible. But that didn't matter, because if you have infinite damage and you have effectively infinite removal, what does your opponent do against it? Do they gain infinite armor? Yeah, actually, that was pretty good against it. Odd Questline Druid, Questline again, was actually a very good counter to this deck, and it was powerful at the time, but it's not nearly as good as Questline was during the mini set, like I said. But this deck just, what else is there to say? You had the 1-mana Rapid Fire, you had the pre-nerf Defend the Dwarven District, you had your 3-mana Hero Power, you could run Auction Master Beardo, I think that's what it's called. You could run, maybe that's not what Beardo is called. Sorry, you just run Beardo, the 3-mana 3/4 that every time you play a spell refreshes your hero power. So you didn't even have to complete the quest. You only had to get to stage 2 on the quest to get your 0-mana hero power. You didn't have to play your 5-mana 7/7 and 2 more spells to get it. So Beardo just allowed you to pump out this damage so early on to the game. And then it didn't matter if you didn't kill your opponent. You just would grind them out over turn after turn after turn because you at least had a 0-mana hero power that you could still refresh every single turn due to just how many spells were in your deck. Yeah, you had Baku, and everyone knows drawing Baku sucks. Oh no. Baku was fucking... The thing about this deck as well is that drawing Baku a lot of the time didn't affect you because it was one of your best ways to protect your Tavish, because if your Baku got ratted or eaten by Mutanus, things like that, you were incredibly happy. This is one of the only decks that was happy with drawing Baku. That should tell you just how strong it was. Like, if any deck in the game is happy drawing Gen or Baku, you know something is wrong, because it just loves the fact that it can have its hand protected, or at least a little bit more protected by this minion, because it just has so much value naturally from existing that it's just insane. If you played this deck at the time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was good in Standard even. It was good in non-odd questline. This card was just unfucking real. Then for Mage, I'm going with Ignite Mage. This one might be controversial, but Ignite Mage was absurdly disgusting. This is the most cheated deck of all time. I like, there's just no way. You had constant Reddit posts, constant Twitter posts about players cheating while playing Ignite Mage because their turns would just go on forever. It was unreal. This deck just, I don't even know how to describe it better than just saying, oh, it was broken, because how do you describe a deck that would run absolutely terrible cards? It would run a million tradable cards because it didn't really care about card draw. It just wanted to be able to cycle through its deck as fast as possible. So it ran all these tradable cards just to trade through. Then you would have your Sanctum Chandler, your Ignite, your Sorcerer's Apprentice, and your Elemental Evocations. Then you would cheat out the Sanctum Chandler, cycle through your deck with the fire spells that you have in your deck to draw your Ignites. Then, because of Sorcerer's Apprentice making everything cost 0, you just hit your opponent in the face over and over and over and over with Ignite that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you had fast enough APM, you would kill your opponent. You could deal pretty easily like 40, 50 damage with this combo if you had good enough APM, which is insane for an APM deck to do. Most APM decks aren't actually that good into armor, but this deck, gaining 50 armor is gaining up to 50 health isn't that easy, especially when you have, you could just play Ignites throughout the game to chip down the armor. So your opponent being able to survive and, out armor it wasn't that likely of an option. This deck is also currently really strong, again, even with 4-mana Sorcerer's Apprentice, which says a lot. Because with 4-mana Sorcerer's Apprentice, this deck is still very strong right now as I am recording this video. That's how good this deck would have been with 2-mana Sorcerer's Apprentice. It would probably be the best deck in the game with 2-mana Sorc. It just would. It would have been unreal and great against so many different decks. It's just crazy. a lot of these decks are just, you had to be there to witness it, and this one, oh my lord, it's one of those for sure. Then for Paladin, I chose Even Paladin from the Witchwood. This one, a lot of people would argue, oh, it got nerfed so early on, why would you put it here, yada yada. It didn't suck. Even after the Call to Arms nerf, this was still one of the best decks ever. Just recently, I couldn't find the tweet to save my life. I'm so sorry about it. But there was a tweet that resurfaced about how powerful this deck was even after the Call to Arms nerf. Blizzard had it on its radar. If it had any sort of meaningful play rate, they were ready to axe it again. That's how broken this deck was. It got a gigantic nerf in Call to Arms, one of the best cards ever, being nerfed from 4 to 5, and then the deck, which already used Call to Arms to great efficiency, didn't even need it. It was that powerful at the time. I wish I was able to find the tweet to show this. I'm so sorry about that. It's so old, I couldn't find it. But if you have a deck that gets a gigantic nerf, like losing Call to Arms, such a powerful card, and it's still so broken that Blizzard basically just prays that no one plays it in fear that they'll have to nerf it again, that should tell you just how strong it was. If you had played with the Call to Arms version, you knew how fucking broken that deck was. It was so unreal. Call to Arms in your Even Paladin just let you do some unreal things. You didn't have to run 1-drops because you had a 1-mana hero power, so you only ran 2-drops, which made the deck significantly better just on its own. Not having to run 1-drops, but still always having a 1-mana play is unreal for Standard at the time during this era. It's part of the reason why, it was so good, obviously, but the consistency in being able to weave in your 1-mana hero power at this time, basically giving every minion you play +1/+1 if you had the mana to do it, just having such mana efficiency. You had Call to Arms, summon all your great 2-drops. You had Silver Sword, which would buff 4 boards because it had 4 durability. It's unreal, this deck. You could have made an argument for it to be Odd Paladin at the same time. I would have not said that you're desperately wrong, but just the fact that this deck was so underrated, I want to talk about it mainly. Yes, a lot of these decks are very obvious. This one's probably one of the least obvious, but man, was it broken. Then for Priest, I'm choosing Tiller Priest. When Hysteria came out in Dark Moon races, Warlock and Priest were both able to make great use of Wretched Tiller. You would give it immune, you would lower the attack of enemy minions, all these sort of things, and then Tiller would be able to OTK your opponent. It was disgusting. Hysteria is already a great card for removal, so sometimes you could use the Hysteria just for removal. Tiller Priest and Tiller Warlock completely warped Wild to it, a pretty disgusting degree. It's not something that we've never seen before, the amount of warping that it did, because you could still play a few other decks. But for Priest, this is easily the best deck. It got nerfed incredibly fast. It was so disgusting. And who doesn't like talking about a really random 1-mana 1/1 common from a expansion that long ago that people had completely forgotten, turning into a broken card? This happens not very often, but when it does, it is so cool. So Wretched Tiller Priest, easily one of the best. Then for Rogue, you had, Big Rogue and Murder at Castle Nathria. And although sketchy information came out in United and Stormwind, it hit critical mass of all the cards that it needed by the time it got to Nathria. It would play your sketchy information on your Cobalt Illusionist. You'd summon, a 1/1 Scrapyard Colossus or Stonebound General, I think it's called, which would summon, a 7/7 with Taunt or an 8/8 with Rush, or you would just have infinite Cobalt Illusionist, because sketchy information would summon a Cobalt Illusionist from your hand, and then it would keep resummoning your Cobalt Illusionist. So you would have infinite boards and infinite giant Deathrattle minions that was literally impossible to deal with for almost every class. Because what are you going to do? Run silence cards in 2022? No, you're not. You're not going to run any silence cards. Shard of the Naru was a fine card, but are you going to play Shard of the Naru in your Shadow Priest? No, you're not going to do that. They had nerfed your Smothering Starfish from 3 to 4 mana, and you're not going to run it just for this deck. And yeah, this deck was incredibly powerful, but it wasn't the most popular deck at the time. So that's why would you run a tech card just for this deck when it's not the most popular card? It just became so degenerate, and they had to nerf. They nerfed sketchy information, they nerfed Cobalt Illusionist, and they nerfed Graveyard at different times, yes. But that should tell you just how disgusting this deck was at peak power. It was unfucking real, dude. And then, like, there are multiple different ways to play big rogues at the time. You could have played, like, Nethrium Apothecary big rogue. That's another one that I could have put up on here. It was incredibly powerful, but I feel like this one is a little bit more recent and has a lot more hatred towards it. Then for Shaman, easily the easiest one to choose. I'm like, yeah, for Hunter, I could have maybe said Naga Hunter, because Naga Hunter was really strong. You know, Naga Sea Witch. It got that Reddit post ad to get it nerfed. I could have chosen that. But for Shaman, it is 100% Descent of Dragons Galakrond Shaman. This deck is unfucking real. You would play Corrupt the Waters just to hero power Galakrond the Tempest and get 4 8/8s. That's how absurd this card was. Then you would have your Shudderwalk to repeat it. You would have so many gigantic boards that your opponent couldn't deal with because you were already building boards throughout the game that they had to deal with. It was unreal. This deck got so many nerfs. It's crazy. And everyone already knows that Shudderwalk is one of the best cards ever released, especially for Shaman. It's one of the best Shaman cards ever. So being a deck that makes incredible use of one of the best applications of Shudderwalk, which is building more and more boards and protecting those boards because of battle cries that protect boards, that made this Galakrond Shaman deck so absurd. It's similar to what you see nowadays in Shudderwalk in Wild, where you build a gigantic board with the Shudderwalk and then just have battle cries that protect the board, like your Loatheb, your Boom Pistol Bully, actually mainly just those. And because your opponent can't deal with it, you just hit him in the face. It's a lot more efficient than bouncing Shudderwalk infinitely. That's not reliable. If you lose any of the combo pieces, you're incredibly angry about it because your Shudderwalk suddenly can't kill your opponent, things like that. But if you build a giant board of 8/8s that your opponent can't clear because you can't play cards, what do? They die. And this deck was so broken. I think it was nerfed three whole times. That's unreal. Most decks receive one nerf and then they become unplayable. Galakrond Shaman, 3. Okay. Warlock has more broken decks than every other class combined. That's probably not true, but it's still up there. So I broke it up into 2 parts. I'm going to go with 2 decks that you might be able to argue maybe aren't the most broken. I don't think so. I think this one for sure is. But the second one, you can maybe argue it, but I have to mention it. So let's start with Snip Snap Warlock. Okay, let's paint a scenario for you. Your opponent plays a Mecharoo on turn, let's say, 4 as Warlock, right? You can maybe kill the first half, but you can't play the second half. Then your opponent gets their turn 5, and they win the game. Yep. Being able to play these, the Snip Snap with your, what is it called? I can't remember off the top of my head. Sorry, Summoning Portal. You would play Summoning Portal, then you would play your Mech Warpers, which at the time were 2 mana, and then you could play infinite Snip Snaps on that Mecharoo to the point that you would just be able to kill your opponent because they couldn't clear a 1/1 on turn 4. Or if you got to, or I guess in the same way, you could play your Summoning Portal into your Mech Warper, and then you would just build a gigantic board of Snip Snaps that your opponent couldn't clear because if you had enough APM, you could have probably 60-60 worth of stats on board just by playing 30 Snip Snaps. What? What? On turn 5? And this is, you might be able to say, turn 5 in Wild. This was what? 5 years ago at the time? 5 years ago in Wild? You couldn't fucking clear that. You know what class in the game had a 5 mana way to clear an entire board? Warrior with Brawl. You know what Brawl does? You know what Brawl historically has done all the time? Leave 1 minion up. And you know what that 1 minion could be? A fucking 30 attack minion that has a million Snip Snaps on it. It's just unreal how powerful this deck was. The main reason it was broken, too, is because Warlock at the time had the best removal in the entire game, so aggro decks couldn't even compete against it. You couldn't out-aggro this deck because you had Plague of Flames, you had Defile, you had, so many just disgustingly broken cards at the time, and it was actually impossible to play against. Snipside Warlock is probably the best deck ever made. It's one of the first decks to ever have a mechanic changed in Hearthstone. It got Echo as a keyword nerfed to Echo cards can't cost less than 1. The first card can, but the Echo effect can't cost less than 1. It's one of the first times this has happened, especially through Wild. Like, that is just unreal. But this, I would still say this is the best Warlock deck ever, but this is not the best Warlock deck in recent years, obviously. Because it's fucking discard Chamber Warlock. Oh my goddamn, dude. Whoa the fuck made Chamber of Assidious. Okay. I'm calm. I am normal. Discard Warlock and Twist, easily one of the best decks ever made, just bar none. That Discard Warlock and Twist. Absurdly broken. Discard Warlock in Wild with Chamber of Assidious, you might be able to argue it's not better than some of the decks on this list. You might be able to. Or it's not better than some Warlock decks. You might say, oh, what about the Demon Seed? Oh, what about the Demon Seed? The Demon Seed did not have a card that had a 90% win rate. Like Chamber of Assidious. You heard me right. It had a 90% win rate across all ranks. No other card has ever been able to do that. Ever. Chamber of Assidious is so unfathomably broken that, like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't understand who made this card. I don't understand what they thought was going to happen when you make this card. It was so clearly broken. It was so clearly overpowered that anyone and their fucking grandmother could have told you this would be too strong for both Twist and Wild. And they still printed it. And we had to suffer a full month before this card was nerfed. A full month of a tier 1 deck that had a card with a 90% win rate in it. What the actual fuck are you supposed to do against this deck? And again, you might be someone who doesn't believe that it was broken. You know, oh yeah, you could have other Warlock decks are more powerful. No other Warlock deck had a 90% win rate card. None of them. I want to point out I was actually up to 93% at one point. 90% is just a low ball. Then for Warrior, I'm going to go with Ashes of Outlands, Skipper, Enrage Warrior. Remember what I said about Demon Hunter, how it was incredibly overpowered, nothing could really deal with it, all that yada yada? I lied. It had one deck that could beat it, and that was Ashes of Outlands, Skipper Warrior. Most of the time, a lot of people would like to argue, Rise of Shadows, Control Warrior. Rise of Shadows, Control Warrior had multiple decks in the meta that were good and could be played against it. Ashes of Outlands Skipper Warrior didn't. It had one deck that it was playing against, and it beat that one deck. And then all the other decks, it was pretty good against. But none of those other decks mattered because those decks all lost to Demon Hunter. So it was Warrior Demon Hunter, Warrior Demon Hunter, Warrior Demon Hunter, Warrior over and over and over, to the point that who cares? If you have a 2-deck meta and the best deck in the game loses to a deck that also beats almost everything else, that other deck is really goddamn broken. There's nothing that really comes close to this throughout Warrior's repertoire. I've asked Warrior players what they thought, and most of them think it's this one as well. It's just like the only thing that comes close, in my opinion, is Pirate Warrior and questline Pirate Warrior on release in Wild. That deck was really broken, but it was mainly broken at lower ranks because low skill players suck ass at finishing out games, and they couldn't really they just would never abuse the fact that an aggro deck would skip its turn 1. Yeah, I mean, the deck was good. It was very good at Legend, but it was mainly really broken at lower ranks, the questline Pirate Warrior. So I don't think it's fair to put it up here at the same way that this deck was dominating in Standard to the point that it beat the best deck in the game, and it was still probably the best deck in the game at the same point. So yeah, that's going to be it for me. Oh, that's weird. What was that? Anyway, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Sorry this one is both coming out late and it's extra long. This is just a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and it took me a little bit to, get a reason to do it. But yeah, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to join the giveaway by commenting your favorite Hearthstone card down below. It's for Perils in Paradise, which releases on July 24th. And become a member to join the member giveaway, where I'm giving away another pre-order expansion. And thank you to Electroshocks for joining, becoming a member. It's really nice, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Are rising again.
Darker than they've ever been.